Good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome to worship on this beautifully gloomy and rainy day. Thank God for the rain. What a delightful change. My name is Pastor Chelsea, and it is my joy to welcome you here into God's house this morning. Know that everyone, all are welcome in this place. And if you are a first-time visitor, we want to especially welcome you, and you can find a welcome table out through these doors. It might be in the fellowship hall since it's rainy, and you can find a gift there especially for you to welcome you here to this place. And all are welcome to the fellowship hall after worship to join in celebrating community together, to connect with one another, and to find out about more of the ways we can serve and share God's love as a community together. Now today we continue with our stewardship theme of Defying Gravity. And today our gravitational defyingness is the idea of being tethered to God. Last week we talked about the fact that all of us sometimes find ourselves a little lost, a little away from home. And it's hard sometimes to find our way back, but we worship a God who seeks the lost, who tethers God's self to us through love. And so may this worship service this morning be a time when we are reminded of God's love, an hour where we intentionally begin our week with the awareness of God's love for us and the awareness of God's presence with us, so that that can carry us through our week ahead. And so as the light of Christ comes forward now into this space, we are reminded of how God's light comes into our lives and illuminates even the darkest of spaces, even the spaces where we feel most lost and most confused and most alone. We know that God is truly with us. Please be seated. Today, our Bible reading comes from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 19. It's near the end, getting to the end of the Gospel, and Jesus is starting to make his way on his final journey to Jerusalem. And as he's doing this, people hear that he's journeying to Jerusalem, and they get more and more excited. Crowds start to gather along the way like it's a parade. They're wanting to see Jesus, knowing that maybe if they see him, they'll be healed. Maybe if they see him, they'll find joy. Maybe if they see him, their lives will be changed. And so our story picks up today as Jesus is traveling along into Jericho, which is about 16 miles away from Jerusalem. And predictably, there are huge crowds gathered around, and he heals someone on his way into Jericho. And the crowds continue as he gets to Jericho. And we hear today the story of one man in the crowd and his interaction with Jesus. So listen now to the story from Luke chapter 19, verses 1 through 9.
Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through it. A man was there named Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and was rich. He was trying to see who Jesus was, but on account of the crowd he could not, because he was short in stature. So he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore tree to see Jesus, because Jesus was going to pass that way. When Jesus came to the place, he looked up and said to him, "Zacchaeus, hurry and come down, for I must stay at your house today." So he hurried down and was happy to welcome him. All who saw it began to grumble and said, "Jesus has gone to be a guest of one who is a sinner." Zacchaeus stood there and said to the Lord, "Look, half my possessions, Lord, I will give to the poor. And if I have defrauded anyone of anything, I will pay back 4 times as much." Then Jesus said to him, "Today salvation has come to this house, because he too is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek out and to save the lost."
Does anyone remember the movie Gravity that came out a couple years ago? It was nominated for several Oscars. It tells the story of 2 astronauts played by, of course, George Clooney and Sandra Bullock, who go up to the Hubble Space Telescope to do some routine repairs. And while they're out in space doing these repairs, something happens, large space debris comes by, it hits the telescope, damages it, and sends Sandra Bullock's character spinning out through space, alone, not tethered to anything, terrified as she's spinning through this inky blackness. It's a terrifying scene, but it's a scene that kept coming to my mind when I was reading today's scripture in our stewardship book in preparation for this morning's worship. And I think it came to mind because it reminded me of where Zacchaeus is in this story. He's feeling lost, and I think he's spinning out of control, unable to figure out how to get himself to where he wants to be. And so he ends up a tree, but we'll talk about that more a little bit later. But in this lostness, in this terrifying lostness, at the end of the story, Jesus says something comforting, that Jesus has come to seek out and to save the lost. All of us experience this sense of being lost at some point in our lives, and a lot of us probably experience it maybe once a week or more. I know I probably do. And being lost is not fun, and it's scary, and it's hard to find your way home, right? Because by definition, you are lost. But we can find comfort in this promise that Jesus offers, that even when we are lost, we are not without hope, that God's love comes in and is constantly seeking us, constantly finding us. It's like that tether that would reach out and grab that astronaut and tether her back to safety. And so today we rest in that promise that we are tethered to God by God's astounding love. Dr. Snigglefritz? Aren't you Dr. Snigglefritz?
I want everyone to hear me. Schnitzelbank. Dagmar S. Schnitzelbank, a PhD, MCP, DNA, GPS, and LOL. But you can call me doctor.
Surely you don't use all those initials behind your name every time you introduce yourself.
Of course I do. And don't call me Shirley. That's my middle name.
I see. Well, I was hoping you could tell me where the director is. Last week she was auditioning scientists to be guests on my new reality TV show, Defying Gravity. Do you know if she's found any?
Scientist in Livermore? Ah! Turns out these so-called scientists weren't ready to support my groundbreaking research into the cancer-causing properties of coconut oil, or the use of coconut oil as rocket fuel, or Microsoft's development of weaponized coconut oil.
Really?
They even thought that defying gravity was impossible. But I'll prove them wrong if it's the last thing I do. I mean, surely we'll be able to convince any skeptics. Rigorous testing, Wikipedia, people in white lab coats, you know, science-y stuff like that.
Oh, well, that's all right then. I mean, that's where I got all my news and information. Who doesn't trust reality TV?
Hey, speaking of reality TV, I'm afraid we're not going to find any real scientists to be on this show.
You mean besides me?
Sure I do. I've asked every scientist in Livermore and nobody would do it, even for the stewardship campaign.
Why not?
Oh, you know, they're worried about being identified with junk science, hoaxes, quackery, go figure. Plus, they're all worried about money. Apparently, there's not a lot of money in science, except for teachers, of course. Everybody's worried about saving every penny or wanting to spend more on a better lifestyle or shopping for new stuff because it makes them feel better.
Managing money is a problem for a lot of people. A lot of my friends are pastors or teachers or social workers, or they work for nonprofits where they don't make a lot of money. They feel like they're giving their time and their energy to people all day long, so it makes it hard to feel like they need to give their money away too.
Well, I plan to give more generously in the future as soon as I've checked off everything off my bucket list. I'm already up to item number 82.
Wow! You must have done almost everything you want to.
I have. Doing a reality TV show is number 83, and pretty soon I'll be able to check that off. Then the only items I have left are going to Mars, curing cancer, and time travel. And finding intelligent life on other worlds. It won't be long now before I can increase my giving to the church.
The stewardship campaign stuff is hard. Well, if this reality TV show doesn't help the stewardship campaign, I'll just have to think of something else.
Well, don't give up yet. I have one more idea. Let me see what I can do.
Will it involve time travel?
Probably not. Still, time travel might be easier than stewardship. Will you pray with me? God, may the words of my mouth, may the meditations of all of our hearts be pleasing in your sight. May we find ourselves tethered to you by your love, and find ourselves found by you when we feel lost. Amen.
Amen.
So have you ever wondered why tax collectors were so particularly and so vehemently hated during Jesus' time? It's not because no one likes to pay taxes. Tax collecting was seen as a smarmy profession, full of people who loved to cheat and take advantage of others. In Israel, in Jesus' time, tax collectors were Jews who had purchased the right to collect taxes for a particular area for the Roman government. They would collect those taxes and then send them on to Rome, but it was understood that the only way for them to actually make any money in this very lucrative profession was to charge a little extra in taxes and pocket that extra for themselves. So if Rome charged you a tax of, say, 500, your tax collector might come to you and tell you that you really owed 800, and then pocket that extra 300 for themselves. And there was nothing to prevent tax collectors from boosting that price, that extra that they collected each year, so your taxes would get higher and higher and higher. And if you decided that you weren't going to pay because this was an unjust system, well, the tax collectors had the full support of the Roman government and the soldiers, and they would make sure that you either paid or were put in jail. So you can understand why tax collecting was seen as such a despicable profession. It was one of the worst things that you could do. They were often called licensed robbers or beasts in human form, and they were seen as so deplorable that tax collectors were actually excluded from all the religious ceremonies and activities in the temple and in the synagogue. And their money was seen as tainted, so that anyone who accepted money from them and did business with them was considered defiled by that tainted money. So tax collectors, not particularly liked. So this makes us have some questions about Zacchaeus then, with this morally questionable picture painted for us of a tax collector. We hear that he is not only a tax collector, but he is the chief tax collector, and he is wealthy. So he has had a wonderful career and amassed himself a wonderful fortune off of exploiting his own people. It would be easy to disregard him right away as the obvious bad guy in this story. But the story insists on continuing, and it tells us that Zacchaeus, this tax collector, has a deep and profound desire, yearning to see Jesus. This yearning sends him up a tree so that he can see over the crowds, because it turns out he's a short guy. He's yearning for something, longing for something. He knows something is missing in his life. And he feels like maybe if he can just catch a glimpse of Jesus, maybe that will satisfy this yearning. Have you ever felt this way? Have you ever felt like you're yearning for something that's missing? Maybe for joy or for purpose or meaning. Like you're longing to find those things in your life, but you just can't seem to find them. I know I felt like this the summer after I graduated college. I was planning on going to seminary in the fall, but that summer in between college graduation and starting at seminary, I worked at a church doing a pastoral internship for 10 weeks. And the church that I was assigned was in rural North Carolina, so I packed up my little Honda Civic with everything I owned, drove off to North Carolina, where I knew no one. And although I loved working at the church, and I enjoyed living in North Carolina, it was one of the most difficult summers and times of my life. I had just left behind a wonderful group of friends who had become like family for me over the past 4 years, and I was living someplace where I hadn't known anyone for more than a couple of days. I felt lost and lonely, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I profoundly lacked joy. Well, this time happened to coincide with me getting ready to move into my first apartment. I had been living in dorm buildings all through college. And so every week or so, I would go out to the store and I would buy kind of all those things that you think you need for your first apartment, the shower curtains and the dishes and the pots and pans and just all the basic stuff. And I remember distinctly, one day near the end of the 10 weeks, I was sitting in my room and I was staring at these bags and bags of stuff that I thought I really needed for my first apartment. And I felt so empty. I was surrounded by these bags of things and home goods, and I looked at them and I knew that, yes, they would be important, and they would be good for when I moved into my apartment, but what I really needed couldn't be found in any of those bags. I knew that I needed community. I knew I needed friendship and meaningful relationships. But this was at the end of the 10 weeks, and I also knew I only had a couple days left in this particular place. And so I felt completely lost at how to find those things that I knew I needed. My hunch is that we all yearn for more than rooms filled with stuff. We all yearn for joy, for purpose, for meaning, for grace, and for love. And while there may be some points in our lives where that longing is more obvious, like me sitting in that room in North Carolina, or Zacchaeus sitting up in his tree, I think we really long for these things every day in our lives. It's just so easy to get distracted by everything around us, by all the things that we need to do, by the stress and the worry we carry through our days, by the financial gravity that pulls at us. Now, if you remember, Zacchaeus, as a tax collector, he's not allowed to join in any of the religious festivals or ceremonies or fellowships in the temple or the synagogue. And there were even people who wouldn't do business with him because he was a tax collector. He was shunned from his community. And so he's had this fantastic, successful career, and he's amassed this fortune, but he feels like he's missing something. And he doesn't know how to get that. I wonder if he feels like that image of an astronaut out in space, spinning and lost, and just wanting desperately to find home, wanting desperately to find joy and purpose, but not knowing how to get there. That is until Jesus calls up to him and says, "Zacchaeus, hurry on down out of that tree, because I'm going to come over to your house tonight for dinner and then to spend the night with you." And instead of being shocked or annoyed at Jesus' slightly uncouth self-invite here, Zacchaeus happily jumps on down and joyfully grabs onto this tether that he has found, that tethers him to what he has been looking for. But predictably, the crowds are not too impressed. They start to complain. They've all been waiting there to see Jesus, and now this tax collector, this worst among them, gets the honor of hosting Jesus in his home for the night. That's just not fair, they say. And so Zacchaeus, unwilling to let go of this joy that he has found, that he has been searching for, he jumps up and he says, well, I'll give half of my possessions to the poor, and I'll pay back 4 times what I've cheated anyone. He willingly and happily bankrupts himself, letting go of his possessions and letting go of his way of making money, because what he has found is so much more important, so much more worth holding on to. Zacchaeus' story reminds us that sometimes the pull of financial gravity pulls us away from the things that we truly need, that we truly desire. Now, I'm guessing probably none of us are the tax collectors of our day. None of us probably make our living in professions that actively exploit and take advantage of people, although we know those professions still exist. But I think we can find ourselves in Zacchaeus' story, in his lostness, in his yearning for more, in his longing for something more than just his work and his stuff. Now, we know that getting the newest gadget and shiny things can be fun, but we also know that it leaves us unsatisfied. It leaves us wanting more. And we know that in the same way, professional success and getting a nice, comfortable bank account can feel rewarding and gratifying, but they too leave us unsatisfied, leave us yearning, seeking, and wanting more. We are made for more than just rooms filled with bags of stuff. We are made for love, for joy. Zacchaeus finds this in the radical generosity that Jesus invites him into. And it is truly an invitation to all of us. So where do you find your deepest joy in life? Where do you find a feeling of purpose and of meaning? And is your life centered around those things, or have other things kind of started to move in and get in the way and distract from that? Zacchaeus is invited to center his life around this love of God and love of neighbor, lived out in action. And it's an invitation for all of us to find joy, to find meaning, and to find purpose in living out lives of God's love shared with the world. Now, one of the ways we have an opportunity to do this week is you'll find in your mailbox this week a letter from the church with a commitment card in it. And you're invited to take some time to sit with your family and to think about, in the next year, how can you commit to structure your financial lives around the joy of generosity, the joy of love. And then everyone is invited to bring back these cards next week, when we'll bring them together and celebrate as a community the ways that we are called and invited to build together God's love and God's kingdom in the world. And so that's one opportunity in the week ahead. But may we all be seeking out those other opportunities to really structure our lives around the joy and the purpose and the meaning we find in living out God's love. Amen.